Now You Know BC is brought to you by Return It. Don't trash your empty beverage containers. Return them for the deposit refund.
Welcome to Now You Know BC. I'm Bob Kronbauer, also known as BC Bob, and on this show I introduce you to interesting people, places to go, things to see, things that have happened in the past. You'll hear our collective stories, and this week I'm telling you about some stories about crime in BC. From the train robber who invented the phrase "hands up here" to some guys who dug a tunnel under the Canada-USA border to a double murder that took place in Stanley Park and another murder by milkshake. Yes, a murder by milkshake. Let's dig in. Did you know that the phrase "hands up" was invented in BC? It's true. Bill Miner was the first guy to ever use it. At least that's what the lore tells us. He was our province's first and most notorious train robber, and he was known as the Gentleman Bandit because he was just so darned polite. It is said that when he first arrived, he got away with the first BC train robbery ever, which took place near Mission, before changing his name to George Edwards and settling onto a ranch near Kamloops, where he pretended to be just another ordinary guy, not a train robber. There, he teamed up with a couple other criminals named Shorty Dunn and Louis Calhoun to plan a train heist where they had hoped to get away with a fortune in cash. They stopped a train at Ducks, which is adjacent to the Thompson River near Kamloops, and they boarded it. They then carried forward on the mail car that they thought had a ton of cash in it. More than $100,000 is what they thought. But they got the wrong train car. The one with the money in it was left behind, and they were left holding $15.50 and a bottle of liver pills. That's all they got. After 6 days, the teams of trackers and cops found the culprits and apprehended them while they were enjoying a nice lunch next to a fire. But before they could take them into custody, Shorty Dunn shot one of the cops right in the leg. Louis Calhoun drew his gun, but he was taken down quickly. And Bill Miner, he never drew his gun at all. He was, after all, known as the Gentleman Bandit, and he had a policy of not shooting people. Very nice of him. Shorty's nickname was Shorty because he was short in stature, and his gun was tiny. Bill Miner was tall, and he had a huge gun. Lastly, Louis was average, and he had a normal-sized gun. These guys were like the three bears of train robbers, and the BC Penitentiary in New Westminster was where they ended up eating their porridge. They got 25 to life for their various roles in the robbery that made them $15.50 and a bottle of liver pills richer, but Bill's time in prison was a lot shorter than 25 years. He escaped within a few months and made his way back to the States, where he again was arrested for robbing trains, more than once. Not only did Bill Miner's watch and gun remain in BC, but so did his story. He became a legendary figure despite only living here for a few years. There was a film made about him. A winery was launched near Kamloops a few years back, and their marketing was all around his story. There have been no less than 2 pubs named after the guy, one in Maple Ridge and the other in New West, that operates on the same piece of land that they converted part of the old BC Penitentiary from. He was a true gentleman to the people on the trains he was robbing, but it was also because people hated the railway. They had a saying that went, "Bill Miner robs the CPR just once or twice a year, but the CPR robs us every single day." Guess it was expensive to ride the train back then too. After he wrote to our warden asking for his watch back, he escaped jail 2 more times in the States and eventually died of gastritis that he got while he was hiding out in a swamp. And he swallowed some brackish water. It made him sick, and it ultimately killed him. He was 65 years old. And now you know. Each week I show you an artifact that I think is an important part of BC's history. And this week I've got a couple for you, and they're part of a very heavy story. These 2 shoes were loaned to me by the Vancouver Police Museum, and they were actually evidence from a double murder that took place in 1947, and which was actually recently solved after almost 70 years. 2 children lost their lives in Stanley Park, and the case became known as the Babes in the Woods. These shoes were found along with their skeletons and other pieces of evidence at the scene of their murder. They were discovered in the forest in Stanley Park by a groundskeeper doing brushwork in 1953. Their remains were covered with a woman's coat, and it was concluded at that time that they'd been bludgeoned by someone using a hatchet, which was found near their bodies. Initially, the medical examiner thought that they were a boy and a girl, which made it harder to solve because a DNA test in 1998 revealed that they were actually two boys. The case was finally solved in 2022. The police took DNA from the remains and uploaded it to a database. Then they used genetic genealogy to figure out who the victims' relatives were and ultimately who they were. They were two young boys, David and Derek Dalton, and they were 6 and 7 years old at the time of their deaths. They were half-brothers who attended Henry Hudson Elementary School in Vancouver in Kitsilano, and their family, who lived in poverty, never reported them missing. It's been assumed by some that their mother, a Russian immigrant named Eileen, was responsible for their deaths. She died in 1996 at the age of 78. You can find out more about them and their story at the Vancouver Police Museum, which was kind enough to loan me these artifacts for this segment. Rest in peace, David and Derek. Welcome back to Now You Know BC. Today we're talking about crimes in British Columbia. My guest is Eve Lazarus, who actually covered the story of the Babes in the Woods for years until it was solved. She's the author of 11 books, a website. She's the host of Cold Case Canada podcast, where she informs people about historical crimes, largely in BC. She's here to talk to me about one of my favorite books of hers, Murder by Milkshake. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having
joining me. So who was Rini Castellani?
Well, in 1965, Rini Castellani worked at CKNW, and he was a bit of a celebrity. He was a broadcaster, but he also did promotions, and back then CKNW was a top dog, and they would pretty much do anything for ratings, and it was his job to keep those ratings up. And he did crazy stunts. He was a dizzy dialer, where he would punk people, call people up and do a gotcha type of thing. He was a Maharaja, where he dressed up as a Maharaja and stayed in the Western Bayshore and drove around in a limousine and handed out cash. And he also did the Bomac sign, where he climbed to the top of the Bomac sign when it was a car yard and said, I'm going to stay there till every last car is sold, and he ended up staying there for 9 days.
Was it as ugly or uglier than the Toys R Us sign that covers the Bomac sign?
I actually a fan of the Bomac sign, not the Toys R Us, but I'm hoping it'll get back to normal.
That was my joke, sorry. That sign kills me. But the promotion was that he was going to stay on top of this sign. But not only was he all these things, he was also a murderer.
Yeah, and back then, so he was a bit of a celebrity, and his family life, he was married to Esther, she was 40, he was 40. They had an 11-year-old daughter called Janine. And then Rini falls in love with Lolly, the 25-year-old receptionist at CKNW. And rather than get divorced, Rini goes straight to plan B, because divorce was hard back then. You had to prove infidelity, you had to put a notice in the paper. It was, quite embarrassing.
In the newspaper?
In the newspaper, 2 newspapers, and it gave all the details at the time.
Huh.
And he didn't want to do that, right? He was Catholic, he has the image to worry about. So he went to plan B and decided to murder her. So Esther loved milkshakes. So what Rini would do, being the loving husband, he'd go to White Spot on his way home, pick up a vanilla milkshake, her favourite, and then dose it with arsenic.
Oh my God.
And this went on for months, and poor Esther got sicker and sicker. And her mother said enough, and her mother took her to the hospital, to Vancouver General Hospital. And where she stayed for the next 7 weeks, they performed 120 different tests on her, trying to find out what was wrong, and then she died.
Uh-huh.
And her doctor at the time was a guy called Dr. Moscovich, and he'd treated her for the 7 weeks, and he liked her, and he couldn't stand it not being able to determine the cause of death. So he went back over everything, and then it was kind of like this aha moment. Maybe arsenic could have been the cause of these symptoms. So they still had some of her organs from the hospital autopsy, sent it off to the city analyst, tested it, and it came back 1,500 times the normal amount of arsenic that's in a human body. So of course then cause of death went from unknown to murder.
Oh my goodness. And then he got convicted of murder.
Yeah, well, he did a lot of dumb things. He 2 weeks before Esther died, he took Lolly shopping for a house, and they applied for a mortgage in their newly married names while Esther was still alive. The day after Esther's funeral, he takes Lolly's son Don, and Janine, and they go off to Disneyland for a holiday.
Oh my goodness.
So the police are looking at this thinking, hello, he's suddenly become the number one suspect. And, they go to his house, knock on the door and say, could we have a look around? And he said, yeah, sure, come on in. And they find a can of Triox, which is arsenic. It's a weed killer with arsenic in it.
Okay.
It was really easy apparently to get back then at the local drugstore or hardware store. And it's just got enough, that would have been enough to kill her.
And so he was putting it in her milkshakes the whole time.
Yeah. Well, he was charged with capital murder, which came with the death penalty back then, twice. He gets 2 weeks before he's scheduled to hang, the death penalty is commuted. So off he goes to Masquid Prison, which is basically, a new prison. It's mainly for addicts and drug dealers. Within a couple of years, he's out on day parole working for Abbotsford Community Centre, playing Santa Claus at Christmas time.
What?
I know. And then 10 years later, he's completely, let out, and he's working for a station first in Abbotsford, and then he moves to Nanaimo and helps start up a new station.
When did he die? And how did he die? By milkshake?
In the 50s. No, but it was nearly as good. It was calmer. It was pancreatic cancer.
Ah, there you go. Okay.
So he didn't last too much longer.
Well, thanks so much for sharing this story. Your new book is called Beneath Dark Waters, and it is about, what is it about? It's about an accident that killed more people than the Titanic?
Yes, it's the Empress of Ireland, was a CPR steamship, and it was built in 1906, came from Liverpool to Quebec City, and it was going from Quebec City to Liverpool in 1914 down the St. Lawrence River, and it collided with a collier in the fog, and the collier basically hit it in the worst possible place, and it sank in 14 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
So literally 800 people are still in the ship in the St. Lawrence River. There are only a couple of hundred survivors, and I'd heard about this a couple of years ago, and I was shocked that I'd never heard of this story before because, as you said, there were more passengers that were killed that night than on the Titanic, yet most of us don't know.
We're gonna go to break, and when we get back, Nina is gonna talk to some people on the street about crime and maybe death. We'll see. Welcome back to Now You Know BC. Nina is out on the street talking to people about crimes. Nina.
I'm Nina Savage, and this is Street Survey. So I'm at Fan Expo, where I've been told that our province's heroes and villains congregate here every year. Who better to ask about crime? What would you illegalize?
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh my god, walking on the wrong side of the road? Because I feel like at Fan Expo, everyone walks on the left.
Yeah.
Like, walk on the right. I don't know, I would ticket people for that because it's pet peeve. Pet peeve.
There's just so many people doing so many things that they shouldn't be doing.
Totally.
Yeah, give the people the power back. Let's go.
Honestly, those kids that keep running out in front of those cars, really annoying. Because it happens all the time, and I keep having to go and save them.
Are you good or evil?
Oh, Jar Jar's a good guy, of course. More good.
What's your perfect crime that you would commit tomorrow?
Eat the rich. Eat them all.
Run an illegal gambling ring because I don't see anything wrong with gambling.
That's very criminal.
Gungan frogs on restaurant menus? Yeah. Lisa thinking that's delicious.
The crime I would be to steal all of the diamonds? Diamonds? That's a crime. Steal the diamonds? Okay.
I think that's a crime.
We'll do that, yeah.
Do you think Vancouver needs a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man?
I think it does, yes. I think it really does.
Justice doesn't exist. They say, justice is blind, yada, yada, yada. It's all a lie. It is all a lie. There is no justice.
Spider-Man is just a source of hope that can just be there for people whenever they need it.
Yeah.
For Prime Minister.
Yes. And Zelda for First Lady.
Would you consider packing your bags and moving to Vancouver?
Honestly, yeah, actually, Canada's great.
As long as Spider-Man can afford $1 million trillion home.
That's true. That's probably why I haven't done that yet.
It's easier to commit crimes when you're hot.
Well, obviously, because look at me.
I mean, look at you. Is there anything that you would like to say to the people of British Columbia?
Don't do drugs. Stay away from drugs.
So BC definitely has a criminal underworld. Thank goodness we have heroes to save the day. This is Street Survey, and I'm Nina Savage.
We're going on a BC road trip to my hometown of Vernon, BC, on the traditional territory of the CHEK and the Okanagan Indian Band, where as a teenager I committed 0 crimes. I never did anything illegal, like hopping fences to trespass and skateboard on private property. I never, ever blew anything up with modified firecrackers, and if anybody tells you any different, they're lying, including my friend Dwayne Lawrence, who's from the Okanagan Indian Band, and he worked as an RCMP officer. Nothing ever happened. I never saw him. We never interacted when he worked as a cop. I moved away from Vernon 30 years ago, and when I'm in town these days and I'm not sleeping on the lumpy couch at my parents' house, I stay at the Prestige Vernon Lodge, where they have nice, non-lumpy beds. It's been there forever, and as long as I can remember, it's always been the best place to stay. And not just because my high school graduation dinner was held there, or because my cousin Rick worked there, or because at one point they had a liquor store where one of my older friends would buy us high school kids alcohol that we'd take to tire fires out in the woods. No crimes, that never happened. In the middle of the hotel is a huge atrium where there's a ton of plants, a restaurant, a pool, and a hot tub, and a historic creek that literally runs right through or under the hotel, and you can see it at some points. Outside of the walls of this wonderful hotel, the historic O'Keefe Ranch is just on the outskirts of town and is a bit like Barkerville, only a little smaller. At the historic O'Keefe Ranch, there's a cute little restaurant that I'm pretty sure is only open in the spring and summer months. So if you go there then, go to the restaurant. In October, they have an amazing haunted corn maze there. It doesn't have anything to do with history, nothing to do with the story of this place, but it's just a very scary corn maze where teenagers dressed up like chainsaw killers scream at you and chase you around. I went with my sister last year and she says it's the best thing Vernon has to offer. And for the record, my sister Melanie has never committed a crime of any sort. I'm not even gonna tell you which ones she has not committed. Next, you might want to know that Okanagan Springs Brewery was founded here. It's one of the first craft breweries in BC, and they still operate in the same place where they started. They're bigger now. And in fact, my late Auntie Marie used to work here way back in the day on the bottling line. The best boozy place to visit these days is called Cambium Cider. It's located on a family orchard, and that family turns some of their wonderful apples into even more wonderful alcoholic cider. They've got a farm-to-table restaurant attached to the cidery. They often have live music and other events, and the atmosphere cannot be beat. You're in an orchard. It's so great. Lastly, there are tons of trails in Vernon, and you will probably be surprised to learn that they were recently deemed to be the official trails capital of British Columbia. The trail that I enjoy the most is the one that goes down to Cousins Bay in a provincial park that used to be used by the military for mortar bomb practices. We'll get to that story in a future episode. That is wild. The land was turned over to the Army, by the Army, in 1975, and it was turned into a provincial park at that time. It's got a nice little beach at the end of a fairly short hike, so bring a lunch and your sunglasses and try not to do anything illegal, okay? Enjoy your road trip. Welcome back to Now You Know BC. We're gonna do a giveaway, but first, a story about some bumbling criminals. Did you know that in 2005, 3 dudes dug a tunnel underneath the Canada-USA border in an attempt to smuggle drugs from here to there and vice versa? It's true. These guys hailed from the city of Surrey, and the tunnel that they built was very elaborate. It was about 4 feet square, reinforced by rebar and over 1,000 2x4s. It had electric lights, a ventilation system, a cement floor, and a sump pump to keep it dry. and it ranged from 3 to 10 feet below the surface. Its starting point was underneath a metal Quonset hut, which is basically just a shed. That was on this side of the border, our side of the border. On the other side of the imaginary line where the tunnel led out was an old abandoned house in Linden, Washington. The tunnel was 110 meters long and they made it using shovels, a winch, a carting system, and the RCMP and the FBI were both monitoring them for 8 months while they did this. They had heard about a tunnel being made through an informant, but they didn't know exactly where it was being built. They suspected it might be in a Quonset hut, and that suspicion was confirmed when they caught a lady stealing tools out of it. They had set up surveillance on the Quonset hut, and this person just happened to randomly break into it, so they arrested her, they asked her some questions, and she said it looked like somebody was digging a tunnel in there. The US and Canadian sides both got subpoenas to then enter and monitor both properties, and they installed cameras and microphones inside the tunnel, making it a lot easier for them to prove who built it when they took them to trial. After the criminals smuggled 42 kilos of BC bud through it, the courier that accepted the drugs on the USA side was arrested, and arrest warrants were issued for the 3 dudes. All 3 of them pleaded guilty to conspiracy to import marijuana and got the maximum sentence of 9 years each. They've been free men for the past 10 years, and I don't want to know what these guys have been up to ever since, but I'm pretty sure they went underground. Now you know. I'm giving away a $100 gift card to the CHEK, where they serve a dessert that was inspired by the train robber I talked about in the first segment. Billy Miner pie is a legendary BC dish served at the CHEK, in which you can also buy in pints that they now sell at the grocery store. I got this one at Snackland on Main Street in Vancouver last night, and I ate the entire thing in one sitting. It's got a cookie crumble base, mocha ice cream, chocolate and caramel sauce, and almonds, and it's literally one of my favorite desserts. However, I have no idea why it's named after BC's most famous train robber. Nobody at the CHEK got back to me, so we may never know. It is a delicious dessert though, and they make great steaks at the CHEK. To enter to win a $100 CHEK gift card, just sign up for my weekly newsletter at bcbob.ca, where I'll be randomly selecting a winner. That's the show for this week. Big thanks to Eve Lazarus, the Vancouver Police Museum, Nina Savage and Derek Wong, and my editor, Arav. Everybody at CHEK, and lastly, thank you to the folks at the Nisga'a Nation who organized the annual Hobiye event at the PNE, which is free to attend for everybody and which I just got back from. I hope you learned something this week, and I hope you keep your nose clean and don't commit any crimes out there. For more stories, you can follow me on Instagram, watch more episodes of this show for free on CHEK Plus. Check out my merch at bcbob.ca, and I'll see you next week when we'll explore more stories about this great province of ours. And now you know BC.
Now you know BC is brought to you by Return It. Don't trash your empty beverage containers, return them for the deposit refund.